Hey everyone and welcome. Today I'm talking about building a Solarpunk Commons, reimagining skill development in the age of AI and immersive technology. Thanks for joining. I'm really excited to talk to you. My name is Jay and I'm a creative technologist at The Plant, the playground laboratory for new technologies. It's a digital research lab focused on technology, where we use creative digital technology and methods to experiment and innovate with humanities and social science research. One of our research lines you can see down here in the bottom right, and that's examining the idea of what's possible when you dream of a more technologically just world. When we talk about skilling up for new technologies, and especially new digital technologies, we usually mean one of two things: either building technological competence, such as how to use a tool, or building critical awareness, like knowing that AI is a prediction model and doesn't actually think, that has biases built in the system, the data you put in as prompts that's collected, or the algorithms shape what we see. And all those things matter, of course, but another category of skill that focuses on what we're sharing today is the idea of critical making, proposed by Ratto in 2011, and the literacy of critical making. So, making it as an act for critical inquiry. So, examples of this could include going beyond using and understanding the basics of technology to engage with material conditions. So, like repairing or tinkering with them, calculating the costs of their use or of the repair, understanding the structures and systems that make these technologies, and being able to think about creatively redesigning those political structures or systems, interpreting the data that's produced by these technologies and reinterpreting them for other uses with care and attention, those sorts of things. Critical making merges critical thinking with actual production to use making as a tool for exploring new social, ethical, and technological issues on the way to more responsible social innovation. Research on imagination and futures thinking, so like Benjamin 2019, Winter 2003, etc., shows us the most imagined futures reproduce existing power structures. Whiteness, hierarchy, extraction, these are all assumed as neutral defaults instead of recognized as active design choices. And most importantly, what we consider realistic is shaped by repeated exposure to dominant narratives and institutions. And so, if our students, practitioners, designers, ethicists have only ever been trained to use technologies as they exist, they'll struggle to imagine, let alone build, technologies that work differently. And so, today, skilling up, I want to argue, has to include also expanding what people believe is possible. Enacting change requires practice and not just critique. Change is more likely to be adopted if it's practiced in a low stakes collective environment, kind of like with the IKEA effect, of where you're more committed to systems or furniture, of course, that we build ourselves. You're less likely to throw it away or to become disillusioned with it. So it was this workshop run for the No and a 4-1 Technological Refusal Conference a few months ago in February, where we made kind of like a hands-on refusal lab. So we looked at the skills I talked about today and looked at them as a way of saying no to these dominant paradigms we just discussed. So this workshop was focused on moving beyond the no to instead offer concrete and optimistic alternatives that also lead to a future to which we want to say yes. Solarpunk is a design movement, a speculative fiction tradition, and also kind of like a loosely organized worldview. If you haven't encountered it, it emerged partially from frustration with cyberpunk's dystopian inevitability and climate despair. It's described as kind of like concerned with imagining both the technological and societal complexity of energy transition and the conditions civilizations might face in adapting to living in damaged natural environments. So, canvassing architecture, art, literature, and design, its core trademarks are a utopian, decentralized, community driven, and care based outlook on the world. So, what makes solarpunk useful for education specifically is not only the politics, but also its design methodology. One of the core questions of solarpunk is what would technology look like if it was designed around sufficiency and care, rather than scale and profit? Solarpunk treats technology as something that can always be redesigned, repaired, questioned, and also reimagined. It draws heavily on indigenous agriculture and governance traditions, which have been practicing sustainable community-based resource management for centuries. You might recognize the solarpunk aesthetic from this commercial I'm about to show you. It's actually a Chobani yogurt commercial, of all things, but it's one of the best and most coherent visual examples of what a solarpunk world could look like. So I'll play that for you now.
Dear Alice, this place is yours now. It's a handful, but nothing worth doing is easy. The land is more than just dirt. If you look after it, it will feed you forever. You're a smart one. I know you'll be okay come rain or shine. And remember, a business is only as good as its people, so treat them well. Our job is to plant seeds so our grandkids get to enjoy the fruit. So, eat well, Alice, and keep planting those seeds. Because how we eat today feeds tomorrow.
So now that I know a bit more about what Solarpunk looks like and what it can be, I also want to talk about Solarpunk in regards to the human factor in new technologies. And so this quote from the SSH Council from the 2023 document says that new technologies are often seen as innovative and inevitable, but their features don't always fit human practices, capabilities, and motivations. And so in regards to this, I think that Solarpunk can help us take a look at what we value and figure out what we actually want from technology and from our use of new technologies. So kind of like Solarpunk principles for discernment. So, using the question of what kind of world do we want to live in, we can evaluate our choices and what we teach, learn, and develop, and also how we do so with emerging technology. How would our use of technology change if we reflect on the core tenets of Solarpunk, imagining a sustainable future rooted in communal self reliance, justice, and also care? From Ahmed 2025. And so, kind of like what we've gone over, without imagining the future, we're stuck with the options that are presented to us, what companies dictate as necessary for our lives, our education, or for research. And by engaging our imagination, we can create new ways of reusing technologies for unintended outcomes or develop our own technology systems and tools that suit our own desires, needs, and purposes. What happens where we imagine a technological future where white isn't the default, where programs and apps are understandable, accessible, and can be used ethically without requiring expertise or deep reflection? Or what about sites where we don't pay with our data to use the internet, or to visit a website, or to use an app to connect with family and friends? How would our world change if we focused on technology that aligns our values instead of technology that turns a profit? And what about if we turned over technology creation to community owned collectives to meet local community needs? There are so many different questions that we can consider through the lens of Solarpunk. So we'll dive into a few in relation to skills today. Not many, but I think Solarpunk is a really fascinating topic, and I hope it's also sparking some interest for you as well. So now I'll come dive in a little bit more into what the workshop was, what the activities we ran, that kind of thing. Talk about like the core concept of what today is for, which is developing skills, upskilling, that kind of thing. So specifically, this was designed as a hands-on refusal lab. So basically, a low-stakes collective environment people could practice the refusal of these dominant paradigms. So practicing skills like repair or energy budgeting, looking at data sovereignty, yeah, basically as a space to gain capacity in that and our ability to be creative, to be forward-thinking and hopeful, and also to be able to learn to sit with feelings of discomfort and uncertainty and feeling like we need to learn things and just dealing with kind of like the hopelessness that often our world prescribes onto us. And so we developed four different activities, which you can see below: repair dating profile, slow data crafting, seed and data sovereignty, and also energy budgeting. And I'll walk you through the four hands-on activities that we designed and developed and also tested, each which kind of target one of these specific underexplored skills I've been talking about. So they're designed as one coherent, or at least like a vaguely coherent workshop, but I'll also present them kind of as conceptual arguments. So where each is also a claim about what we think should be included in technology education and the conversation around skilling up. So the first skill, which I hope you can see well enough, is repair literacy. So not just the ability to fix things, but also capacity to diagnose, maintain, and fix the devices that we use. And it might sound really obvious, of course, but e-waste is a major problem, especially considering how much e-waste is repairable or still has useful parts, if only we had the right channels and systems in place to make use of those things. In the EU, the right to repair legislation came into force in 2024 and was partly designed a response to a design culture that has systemically eliminated repairability. Things like proprietary screws, glued components, intentionally withheld documentation, software locks, etc. It extended the right to repair by about 12 months and also made it cheaper and more affordable for repairs and also made replacement parts easier to access. And as part of this, to make repairs more affordable, each member state has to implement at least one measure to promote repair, such as repair vouchers and funds, conducting info campaigns, offering repair courses, or supporting for community-led repair spaces, which is a fantastic first step. And already, the anticipation of similar legislation around the world has already encouraged tech giants like Apple to move from proprietary parts like the Lightning ports to USB-C. And repair is a really important skill, but it's also one that takes time, confidence, and also a lot of trial and error. It's best to practice an environment where help is available, and it can also require lots of specialized tools or expertise. So, to that end, we designed this first activity off the concept of repair cafes. And so, in a world where replacing an item is cheaper and more normal than professional repair, there's often little incentive to spend your time repairing an object. We also often lack the skills, the hardware, the confidence to tackle even basic projects. So, with this, we wanted to imagine a world where you could say no to discarding a mostly functioning object by saying yes to posting your repair profile online in a repair forum to ask for personalized advice and guidance from your neighbors, fellow townsfolk, or local makerspaces and repair cafes. We wanted to ask, how would having that community knowledge, shared skills, and access to communal tools change our lives? This workshop was kind of intended, or sorry, not this workshop, but this part of the workshop was intended as a skills audit. So asking folks what knowledge would they need to repair this? What tools, what documentation, what design decisions are blocking them there? All those kind of questions to reflect on the systemic changes that would need to be made to make this repairable, and also what small steps they could take with their communities or by themselves to repair these objects or reuse them in some other way. One part I also really like about this, it also asks them about their commitment of what are they willing to do. So it could be fixing it themselves with guidance, could be documenting the repair to help others. They could save the parts, or they could also consider alternatives to buying new if this one can't be fixed. There's also space for other as well. But then in general, you can ask for the help, and you also give it a difficulty guideline of how difficult or how many barriers are there before you could repair this. And so the output from this, as you can see, is your repair dating profile. And so it's like a structured record of skill requirements and also designed obstacles. It's directly usable for design education because it makes the political economy of repairability legible to learners through their hands, not just through a lecture. And so the skill being developed is not how to fix a phone, but it's the parts around that, and especially the ability to read advice as a design artifact, and to see that its repairability or lack thereof is a conscious choice by the producers. And so to understand, and so hopefully this also helps them to understand what kind of knowledge infrastructure would be needed to start changing that at a larger level. The second skill that we kind of hope to teach through this workshop was one that we'd call embodied data interpretation, the ability to engage data slowly, attentively, and also with a sense of the human being that it represents. So, really bring the person back into the data set. In general, we tend to train folks in quantitative data literacy, which is very important, of course, whether it's like understanding dashboards, statistics, significance, visualization tools, etc. All those things are also super important. But what we don't teach anywhere near as much is data crafting, or in terms of thinking, creating physical material representations of data sets. So this activity asks people to take a small data set. Each of one represented a real person, a real tragedy. So this is working with data mostly from Missing Migrants Project, which is a project that tracks data on people who are immigrating to different parts of the world, mostly under the search for refuge as a migrant, and then keeps track of that to inform lawmakers and other important decision makers to try and make processes for this safer. So it's a very heavy data set, which in this case I think is really important, especially when you're working with a data set that really is so abstracted that you can't see the individual in it. This is a really good opportunity to try to think and connect with the individual to the degree that you can. Or for this assignment, we also offered an alternative data set of census data because you never know anyone's background, of course. And yeah, it's a heavy topic on purpose, but I think respecting that is really important. It was something called thinkering, or thinking through tinkering. And so we're trying to avoid the algorithm extraction of large data sets and quantitative algorithms, and instead trying to rehumanize data, making people be seen as individuals and as people again. And so by engaging with the data in a slower way, we hope to think more deeply of people who are captured in our data set. And the learning is really in the contrast. Because other participants found out when you spend 10 or 20 minutes really just looking at one or two data points to represent a single person, and then you compare it with like the whole data sheet of like 1,000 rows, it really does something. Because it really makes you sit and engage with this one person and the tragedy of what happened. The skill is also intended to connect to what Ignacio and Klein call data feminism, the argument that data visualization is never neutral, and the choice about what to count, how to display, and also at what scale are also always ethical choices. And so the skill that we're building here as part of this is capacity to make those choices deliberately and also recognize when they're being made deliberately. to invisibilize something or someone or part of the set for a reason. And I think this skill, especially, is one that becomes even more important in the age of AI, because when we have systems that can generate and interpret data at scales that no human can manage alone, the question of like what can humans contribute uniquely to this process in an animated world is partially answered by this kind of practice and this kind of like reflexivity as you go through this practice. The third skill is literacy around data governance, so the practical capacity to design and reason around consent, access, attribution, and also benefit sharing in data systems. It's a skill that's really important, but often we don't dive into enough because we've gotten so used to the idea that these things are outside of our control, that our data needs to be for sale, that kind of thing. And so this activity uses the seed library as a metaphor. We call it designing a data garden. But basically, we ask participants to design the governance system for a community seed library. So, who can contribute seeds, who can access them, how origins are tracked, what happens when someone profits from the seeds that they receive in the commons, and also whether some seeds should be restricted or held in trust. And so, their main job is to use the principles of Indigenous data sovereignty to create that sharing system, but one that really centers consent, reciprocity, and also community care. Seed sovereignty, both as a metaphor for data sovereignty and also just in general, um, is a really well developed body of thought, especially in Indigenous governance traditions. And the OPCAP principles is something I'd really like to point out, as well as the CARE principles as well. These both offer sophisticated frameworks for thinking about consent, authority, responsibility, and ethics in data systems that are more developed than many corporate data governance frameworks. And they're also far more ethically arranged as well. One of the reasons of why this is so timely, though, is that question of AI and the question of who owns training data. Whether it's communities whose images, text, and voices were scraped to train these large language models, if they have any right to the data, any right to benefit, any right to withhold it as well. It's a really important question. We have GDPR as a framework, of course, but just because we have it doesn't mean it's always followed, and it's also not as extensively implemented as it possibly could be as well. So it's really good as a legal framework, but it doesn't give a lot of practical guidance for designing these systems that genuinely embody consent and benefit sharing. And so the skill here, especially, is governance design, that ability to translate values, so consent, reciprocity, community care, into actual system rules. And that's a really important skill that I think anyone who is building or deploying or managing data systems should have. And this fourth skill is one that I think will become even more important in the next few decades, which is energy literacy for computing. We know that a single ChatGPT query uses almost 10 times the energy of a standard Google search, and that training a large language model like GPT-4 probably used the annual electricity use of several hundred average US homes. Obviously, for a lot of these things, we only have approximations, but regardless, that is almost 4% of global energy consumption in 2026. Like, that is insane amount of energy, and it might only increase. We don't know for sure. But either way, like, we know these numbers, but it's also really hard to have a more tangible sense of what does this actually mean and how do we actually contribute or take place in these problems. And so the activity that we designed, which we call energy budging, gives people more of a sense of what does every action they do in a standard workday take, like how much energy does it use. And then we scale that up to a year. What does that actually take? And so this is both like a design constraint exercise, so examining how can you live your life within these data constraints or energy constraints that we have, and then also a values clarification exercise of what things are most important to you. If you had to let go of certain things, what would you choose to let go of? What is like actually needed in your life? What is luxury? What is not? And so it also helps people to realize sometimes that there are also other alternatives. So just because we do work in a standard way doesn't mean that we have to do these things. We can also find other alternatives to make it work as well. The EU AI Act also includes provisions on energy transparency for high impact AI systems. And so that the skill of being able to read, calculate, and also design around and with these energy constraints is something that's going to be really important for the next generation of digital practitioners. So here are a few photos from our past workshops. I really enjoyed them. You can see just the joy and the interest on the faces as engaged with these. But I wanted to also take us back to what we were discussing earlier about how change-oriented learning actually works. And so we know from a lot of research that change is more likely to be adopted when it's practiced in a low stakes collective environment, kind of like this workshop. So not something that's just discussed, but it's also hands on with other people and that you learn through the doing. There's also, of course, that well documented IKEA effect, which is that we're more committed to systems and structures we built ourselves, whether that's furniture in the literal sense of IKEA of constructing a chair that you keep for many, many years because you built that, you invested your time and energy, or whether it's systems around data governance or repairability, policies around AI, that sort of thing. And so I think all these four activities come together and kind of follow the same framework in many ways. So for all those activities, there's kind of like a diagnosing stage, a building phase, and also a reflection phase. And all these things together, of the hands-on making to the discussion to the reflection, they don't just learn about the problem, but they also engage with it physically and practically there and also with others. And so I think every participant that joined us came away with these four skills, at least starting to be initiated in their lives, which is really cool. And so that's also partially what I wanted to argue today, which is that truly skilling up for digital citizenship looks like the embodied practice of repairing device, of sitting with one data point and reflecting on the humanity of that data point, of building a consent system and understanding how to do so ethically and really think through all of the things we need to think through. And then also working with an energy budget and understanding how those are produced and how much we actually use in a day. These are all teachable and also learnable skills, which aren't always included in how we teach and what we do. And so we wanted to argue today that these are skills that should be equally considered, not just how do you fix something, how do you make a data set, how do you clean your data, all of which are, of course, really important things. You need the practicality of like, how do you do this? How do you teach this? What do you use it for? You need that practicality to then also take it to other parts and look at how do you diagnose, how do you discuss the systems around it, and continue with that to enhance your critique. The questions conference is asking about how to skill up for new technologies, we think that this part fits really well, of making sure that we're not just looking at the classic skills, but also opening our minds to what skills can be and what we need to consider as skills for our future, given how much the world is changing. So thank you very much for listening to this talk today. I appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for the recording instead of being there in person, but many thanks again, and hope you all have a great day. Bye.